Jimmy Page, a guitar god and rock and roll legend, is? Well, God, the legendary guitarist from one of the world's most famous bands, Led Zeppelin, has won over admirers all around the globe with his music and has earned the utmost respect and admiration from his peers and fans. But there were stories concerning the life of the great guitarist that hid behind his unequaled influence on rock music. If you want to know how Jimmy Page's recent revelations validated various fan theories, you should watch the video. Jimmy has been inducted twice into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, which means he has likely been featured on the cover of every guitar magazine worldwide. For a long time, he was the guitarist everyone desired in countries like the UK. Jimmy remained even more enigmatic because, despite his achievements, he guarded his private and retained his secrets. Jimmy began his journey, just like everyone else. Jimmy Page's birth name is James Patrick Page, and he was born in Heston, Middlesex, London on January 9, 1944. Patricia Elizabeth Gaffigan and James Patrick Page are his parents. After relocating to Feltham in 1952, Jimmy's family settled into Miles Road, Epsom in Surrey. As a young lad of 8 years old, he attended Epsom County Pound Lane Primary School in that area. Plus, he enrolled in West Ewell County Secondary School when he was 11 years old. His mother was a doctor's secretary while his father was an executive. Jimmy picked up a guitar when he was 12 years old. Since nobody returned to claim the guitar, Jimmy was free to play it once he discovered it in the house they were renting at the time. I don't know who left the instrument here, maybe the previous owners or a friend of the family, he admitted to himself. Its presence remained a mystery to all. I didn't have many guitarists around when I was growing up, Jimmy said of his early years of learning, after which he took a few classes in Kingston. I learned the basics from the lone guitarist at my school and then went on to study on my own. When I was bored, I listened to recordings to help me learn. For me, it turned into a really introspective voyage. Rod Wyatt, the other guitarist, was a little older than him. At Jimmy's place, they would practice with another person named Pete Calvert. In particular, Jimmy devoted a great deal of time to practicing and would not be apart from his cherished guitar, even when it was in school. At that school, he could bring it into the building, but he couldn't use it in class. As a result, Jimmy frequently had it stolen from him during class and then given back to him afterward. Jimmy was interested in folk and blues music as a result of listening to artists like Elmore James, Bert Jansch, John Renbourn, and B.B. King. After Jimmy, then a teenager, joined a skiffle group in 1957, they made an appearance on All Your Own Talent, hosted by Hugh Weldon. Hits like In Them Old Cotton Fields Back Home and Mama Don't Want a Skiffle Anymore were among their many musical interpretations on BBC One. Jimmy played a Hofner President acoustic guitar that he had saved up from working odd jobs throughout the summer. If a cure for cancer hadn't been found by then, Jimmy planned to conduct biological research to develop one. When questioned about his future intentions, it was obvious that the little lad was kind-hearted. Quickly realizing he wanted to devote himself fully to music, he dropped out of school at the age of 14. The Crusaders were a band he eventually became a part of. He was a member of Neil Christian's band for about 2 years and appeared on several of his songs, including the 1962 single The Road to Love. Jimmy had to halt his tour after contracting glandular fever while performing with Neil Christian. He chose to immerse himself in painting while he was healing, rather than returning to music. He attended the Surrey-based Sutton Art College and mentioned that he spent a lot of time on a bus. After dropping out of school 2 years ago, I continued doing it till I started to get decent bread. I returned to art college nevertheless because my health was deteriorating. And that was the whole pivot. For that reason, I claim it is doable. No matter how much time I put into the guitar, I knew that style would hurt me in the long run. Glandular fever would strike every 2 months. For the following 18 months, I continued to play while surviving on $10 a week and building my strength. While he was a student, he occasionally shared the stage with notable bands such as Eric Clapton, Alexis Corner's Blues Inc., and Jeff Beck. After catching his eye one night, John Gibb of the Silhouettes approached him about recording some tracks for EMI, including The Worrying Kid. Jimmy dedicated himself to session work after experimenting with several ensembles, such as Carter Lewis and the Southerners, Mike Hurst and the Method, and Mickey Finn and the Blue Men. The good news is that Decca Records' Mike Leander gave him regular studio jobs. Diamonds, a single by Jet Harris and Tony Meehan that he recorded during his debut session for the label, reached #1 in early 1963. While working as a session guitarist, Jimmy went by the name Lil Jim P. So no one would mistake him with Big Jim Sullivan, another well-known session guitarist from England. When recording artists required a substitute or second guitarist, Jimmy was frequently summoned as a backup. Since Jimmy couldn't read music when he was little, they initially let him play whatever he wanted. Not long after, Jimmy became Shel Talmey's go-to session guitarist. The opportunity to play guitar on songs by iconic bands like The Who and The Kinks came his way as a result of this. He contributed 2 tracks to The Kinks' debut album featuring his acoustic 12-string guitar. He contributed to The Who's first single, I Can't Explain, on rhythm guitar, and another song as lead guitarist. Jimmy was hired by Andrew Loog Oldham, who was the manager of the Rolling Stones, in 1965 to serve as the label's primary producer and AR representative. John Mayall, Nico Chris Farlow, Twice as Much, and Eric Clapton were among the artists whose songs he contributed to or produced because of this. In the same year, he oversaw the production of Thank You Boy, a song by Dana Gillespie. American singer Jackie DeShannon was rumored to be Jimmy's girlfriend during this period. For a short time, the two collaborated on songwriting. The Marini Wishful by John Williams, Sunshine Superman by Donovan Leitch, and Release Maine by Engelbert Humperdinck are just a few of the albums on which Jimmy and Big Jim Sullivan collaborated. Jimmy also contributed guitar work to songs by Joe Cocker, Johnny Hallyday, and Al Stewart. Beginning in 1970, Jimmy contributed 81 minutes of music, 10 tracks on lead guitar for Roy Harper. He collaborated on a 1974 recording with Keith Richards, who provided guitar and vocals. Along with Rick Gretsch on bass and Bruce Rowland on drums, they collaborated on a track titled Scarlet. Because he was involved in so many sessions during that period, Jimmy often claims that it's tough to remember exactly what he did when asked about the songs on which he played, particularly those on which his role is disputed. He said in a radio interview that he was extremely busy with 3 sessions every day and 15 sessions per week. He might be taking part in a folk session, composing music for a film, or performing with a band. He had to balance a lot of various responsibilities. After Stax Records shifted the emphasis away from guitars and toward brass and orchestral arrangements, Jimmy ceased working in the studio. He compared his experience as a session player to attending an elite university. Without planning ahead, he played in multiple sessions every day. He gained knowledge even if he had several poor sessions. Requests for Muzak drove him to resign. He thought it was ludicrous. Curiously, he became a member of the Yardbirds just 1 week after he had departed. At first, the rigid studio regulations made being a session musician a pleasure. As soon as the music began, you had to play perfectly. After Eric Clapton left the Yardbirds in 1964, Jimmy was offered to join them, but he declined to remain faithful to his friend. On Jimmy's recommendation, Jeff Beck was offered the position when Clapton formally resigned in 1965. The concept of a supergroup was born in 1966 when Jimmy Beck and others released Beck's Bolero. They had hoped to have John Entwistle and Keith Moon on board, but they ran into problems negotiating contracts and finding a singer. Inspired by a remark from Entwistle regarding the project's prospective success, Moon initially proposed the name Led Zeppelin during this period. Just before Jimmy joined the band, he went to an Oxford concert by the Yardbirds. He volunteered to take Paul Samuel Smith's position, and they gladly accepted. Jimmy joined Beck on twin lead guitar after initially playing bass. Constant touring and lack of success led to conflicts, even if they had musical potential. Together, they overcame obstacles to release a single. Despite being members of the Yardbirds, Clapton, Jimmy, and Beck never performed in concert at the same time. The Yardbirds persisted as a quartet, with Jimmy playing lead guitar following Beck's departure. Despite the economic failure of their CD Little Games, the band's live performances grew increasingly adventurous and dramatic, The style that Led Zeppelin would later adopt was born out of these performances. Since the band had not yet completed its tour of Scandinavia when Ralph and McCarty departed in 1968, Jimmy was compelled to recruit replacements. So he formed the new Yardbirds, a moniker drawn from an old joke with John Paul Jones, Robert Plant vocals, and John Bonham drums. It was manager Peter Grant's adjustment to prevent mispronunciation that led to their eventual transformation into Led Zeppelin. From the beginning, Jimmy had a crystal-clear vision for Led Zeppelin. He drew inspiration from his time playing with the Yardbirds, a band that allowed him to improvise extensively onstage. As a result of these encounters, he was able to compose an unprecedented hybrid of blues, hard rock, and acoustic music featuring powerful choruses. It didn't take long for Led Zeppelin to become one of the best-selling bands of all time. Worldwide album sales were between 200 and 300 million, with 111.5 million certified units sold in the US alone. Every one of their 9 studio albums was a Billboard Top 10 smash. 6 of them albums even reached #1. Thanks in large part to Jimmy's production and musical contributions, the band became famous for influencing heavy metal and hard rock. A number of sources informed their distinctive style. While on tour, Led Zeppelin broke records but also became known for their extravagant behavior. They persisted in financial and critical success until the late 1970s despite personal hardships. Jimmy dated French model Charlotte Martin from the 70s into the 80s. Their 1971 daughter, Scarlett Page, is a photographer by profession. During their time together, Jimmy affectionately referred to Charlotte as "my lady." At about the same time, Jimmy had a public relationship with a teenage admirer named Lori Maddox, who went by more than just that name for a year. When Jimmy was 28 years old and she was 14 or 15 years old, this began. Upon initially meeting Jimmy, Maddox felt coerced into going into a room with him. As far as their careers were concerned, Led Zeppelin remained cohesive. However, the final straw was Bonham's death at Jimmy's residence in 1980. After a day of practicing and drinking, Bonham passed unexpectedly on September 25, 1980, at Jimmy's house in Windsor, Berkshire. The coroner's report indicated that Bonham had a heavy alcohol consumption, with 40 shots of vodka being the approximate amount. Bonham was so drunk that day that he was unable to awaken even after his body began to flush off the alcohol. At first, Jimmy couldn't bring himself to pick up the guitar since he was so distraught about his friend's death, but he did get back into music in the end, albeit with an emphasis on solo projects, film soundtracks, and various short-term endeavors. In addition, he began to participate in many humanitarian endeavors. Even though he had doubts about his ability to live to be 40, he celebrated the milestone in January 1984. Reports from Jimmy's inner circle hinted to the imminent prospect of a new band and tour. When Jimmy considered how the blues and early rock artists had shaped his music, he realized that fresh, innovative sounds could be on the horizon. After that, he recorded an album with Roy Harper in 1984 and performed at folk festivals under a number of aliases, including the McGregor's Own. Together with Plant and the Honey Drippers, he recorded The Honey Drippers Volume 1 that year. He also collaborated with John Paul Jones on the score for the film Scream for Help. After this, Jimmy recorded 2 albums as a duo with Rogers, with singles like Radioactive and Satisfaction Guaranteed. Their 1985 self-titled album peaked at 17 on Billboard's Pop Albums chart and was certified gold in the United States. In 1986, after releasing Mean Business and going on tour, they broke up. Jimmy fell head over heels for Love All Over Again while on tour with the firm. While Patricia was working as a waitress in a New Orleans restaurant, he met her. Patricia was a model at the time. When the company's 1986 U.S. tour came to a close, along with Jimmy, Patricia traveled to London. In December 1986, after a couple of months of dating, they tied the knot. James Patrick Page, who was born in April 1988, is their son. In 1995, the pair secretly broke up without saying why. After meeting Jimena Gomez Paracha in Brazil on the No Quarter Tour, Jimmy later got married to her. Jimmy met Jimena when he was 51 years old and Jimena was 23 years old. They became the center of attention due to the large age gap between them. Regardless, they remained a couple for quite some time until, after 13 years of marriage, they too decided to end things. Their union resulted in the birth of Ashen Josan and Zofia Jade. Relationship maintenance was obviously not Jimmy's strong suit back then. Regardless, Jimmy maintained an optimistic outlook and kept climbing the corporate ladder. Jimmy also dabbled in session work, doing sessions for artists like the Rolling Stones, Graham Nash, and Stephen Stills. In 1986, for the album Strangeland by Box of Frogs, he briefly reconnected with his former Yardbirds bandmates. Outrider, Jimmy's solo album from 1988, had guest appearances by Plant and John Miles on the song Waste My Time, which served as the album's introduction. While those were going on, Jimmy reunited with some of his former Led Zeppelin comrades for a few of concerts. The 1985 Live Aid performance was particularly memorable, featuring Phil Collins and Tony Thompson on drums. Jimmy, Plant Jones, and Jason Bonham, the son of John Bonham, performed at the end of the 12-hour Atlantic Records 40th anniversary show in 1988. At a concert at Nebworth in 1990, Plant was taken aback when Jimmy decided to join him on stage. In the same year, Jimmy made an appearance at the Monsters of Rock festival alongside Aerosmith. In addition, he performed at Jason Bonham's wedding alongside the band's former members. After that, Jimmy collaborated with Whitesnake's David Coverdale on the 1993 album Coverdale Page and a brief Japanese tour. On an episode of MTV's Unplugged series in 1994, Jimmy reunited with Plant. Unleaded, their special, was a smashing success and the most watched program in MTV history. In 1998, Jimmy and Plant put out an album titled Walking into Clarksdale. You may find Grammy-winning songs like Please Read the Letter and Most High on this album. The Led Zeppelin album library was enhanced by Jimmy's labors. He was a part of several charity events, including one that his wife had started in 1998 to benefit the Action for Brazil's Children Trust. In the same year, Jimmy contributed guitar work on Puff Daddy's Come With Me, a track that featured Kashmir by Led Zeppelin and appeared on the soundtrack of the Godzilla film. Even SNL included their performance of the song. Jimmy reunited with the Black Crowes for 6 shows in October 1999, following their collaboration at a summer charity event. Some classic rock and blues songs as well as some Led Zeppelin songs were performed. Live at the Greek was a live CD released in 2000 that contained the band's final 2 performances in Los Angeles. Jimmy remained in touch with the Black Crowes after the live record came out in 2000. They embarked on a tour with The Who, but he abruptly abandoned the tour before it concluded. Thank You was a 2001 MTV Europe Video Music Awards performance by Jimmy, Fred Durst, and Wes Scantlin. After that, he performed at the Montreux Jazz Festival and recorded a song with Plant for a tribute album. In recognition of his humanitarian efforts in Brazil, Jimmy was posthumously awarded the Officer of the Order of the British Empire OB 4 years later. In addition to his Grammy Lifetime Achievement Award from Led Zeppelin, he was made an honorary citizen of Rio de Janeiro. The United Kingdom Music Hall of Fame inducted Led Zeppelin in November 2006. Roger Taylor, Slash, and countless other notable fans were seen attending the event on television. While speaking with the BBC regarding the induction, Jimmy mentioned that he planned to release new music in 2007, expressing his desire to collaborate on an album. He also dropped hints about future Zeppelin projects. Jason Bonham, son of John Bonham, and the rest of Led Zeppelin performed at a charity event in London's O2 Arena in December 2007. 20 million tickets were requested for the Led Zeppelin reunion concert, breaking the previous record for most requests for a single music event. As the Foo Fighters played rock and roll to close their 2008 Wembley Stadium concert on June 7th, Jimmy and John Paul Jones joined them. At Guildford Cathedral, Jimmy was presented with an honorary doctorate by the University of Surrey 2 weeks afterwards. At the 2008 Summer Olympics closing ceremony, Jimmy and Leona Lewis performed a duet. Jimmy received a Special Peace Award in 2010 from the UN. Jimmy and Donovan took the stage in London's Royal Albert Hall on June 3, 2011. Then 10 days later at the Shepherd's Bush Empire, he shocked everyone by playing with the Black Crowes. Jimmy was also a guest performer at Roy Harper's 70th birthday concert at London's Royal Festival Hall that year. The British MP Louise Mensch began her campaign to knight Jimmy in November in recognition of his artistic achievements. Then, in December 2012, Jimmy, Plant and Jones were feted at the Kennedy Center by President Obama. For those who have made significant contributions to American culture via the arts, this honor held great significance in the United States. Jimmy and Led Zeppelin's 2013 album Celebration Day was nominated for Best Rock Album at the Grammys. He was bestowed the title of honorary doctor the following year by Boston's Berklee College of Music. While that year, in the midst of their continuing feud, Plant expressed his disappointment and confusion to Jimmy, according to an NME story. Jimmy had vented his anger at Plant for postponing the reunion. Plant instead proposed in a collaboration. Jimmy, who hadn't done a solo tour since 1988, revealed in September 2014 that he was going to put together a new band and play music from his whole discography. While he hadn't yet completed the band roster, he planned to do so soon, and he brought up the prospect of going on tour. Jimmy met Scarlett Sable right when everyone else gave up hope that he would ever find love again. After hanging around for a time to hear Scarlett read poetry at a London bookstore, they started dating in 2014. From that point on, they remained a pair. Jimmy is currently 80 years old, while Scarlett is only 34. They've been co-workers at Jimmy's Tower House in London for nearly 9 years, and she's been with him since she was 25. In contrast to what the media portrays, she says he's a funny family man. Scarlett discussed their low-key relationship in an interview. Many people speak ill of Jimmy because of his Casanova image and his terrible reputation. Not only is he my business partner, but he is also my dearest friend and the source of my greatest humor. When we're in each other's company, it doesn't matter. Our house isn't usually the site of large parties, she said. We are visited by Jimmy's children and my siblings. Together we have a great time in this house. I feel both protected and motivated. It seems Jimmy was successful in bringing a relationship to a close. There have been problems surrounding Jimmy throughout the years, despite his remarkable music career and the legacy he has established for himself. His dubious romance with Lori Maddox was unearthed by the Me Too movement. An associate of Jimmy's brought her to his suite at the Hyatt House in Los Angeles, she revealed, since he was deeply interested in her. Impressive, she said, he looked like a gangster with a cane and a cap over his eyes. They went on to have an intense romance that lasted for years. But when they met, Maddox was just 14 years old and Jimmy was 28. Their relationship was something he did his best to conceal. Jimmy avoided legal difficulties despite the fact that this kind of behavior was considered illegal at the time. He broke up with Maddox and began seeing Bebe Buell, a mature adult, after some time. However, there was additional disagreement. People said Jimmy was into devil worship since he truly liked Aleister Crowley. Finally, he managed to get Crowley to declare, "Do what thou wilt" on Led Zeppelin, the Thread vinyl. Jimmy loved Crowley's concept of personal independence, but there was no proof that he was a Satanist. In 1971, Jimmy did in fact purchase Crowley's former residence near Loch Ness, Scotland. He clarified afterwards that he didn't necessarily mean it was haunted by Crowley. Led Zeppelin allegedly struck a contract with Satan in order to achieve fame. Someone even went so far as to say that the iconic Led Zeppelin song Stairways to Heaven played backwards sounded like a sinister satanic message. While Jimmy did not explicitly refute the accusations, he did state, "I'm not here to influence others with what I believe in," Plant remarked. Who would even think of doing that in response to the entire retrograde Satanism thing? For someone to go to such lengths, you must have a great deal of free time on your hands. In terms of worldwide achievement, Jimmy has unquestionably gone farther than others. Still, he seems unfazed and determined to accomplish more. Jimmy and David Coverdale have discussed the possibility of releasing additional songs from their CD. Page of Coverdale. Jimmy posted about the project on April 18, 2024 on his Instagram and Facebook accounts, and he dropped hints that he would release more tunes like Saccharine in a more extensive version down the road. It's puzzling that he's bringing up the idea of expanding the Coverdale Page album now, a year after its 30th birthday. It seemed like Coverdale had given up on releasing the album as a box set in 2018, despite his repeated statements to the contrary. From a young, enthusiastic guitarist to a legendary rock hero, Jimmy has overcome incredible odds in his path to fame. Over the course of his career, he has changed the face of rock music and inspired many performers. Both musically and personally, he has never stopped reinventing himself. Even at age 80, he is still a highly regarded figure. He is deeply committed to music and has found personal fulfillment in his life.